Life is a constant chase for meaning, for power, and for love. Join us as we follow the thrill of the pursuit and the ultimate cost of catching what you desire. Hit that subscribe button and join the chase in every new episode.
My husband announced my layoff at his own promotion party before I could tell anyone myself. He'd found out that morning, made a few calls to confirm it was true, and decided that was the perfect moment to share. In front of 40 people holding champagne flutes, he put his arm around me, smiled at the room, and said, "Tough timing for my wife? But I'll be taking care of us from here." The room went quiet in that particular way. Rooms go quiet when everyone is embarrassed for someone who doesn't yet know they should be embarrassed. I smiled. I raised my glass. And I thought, 14 months. That's how long I'd been preparing for the moment I would walk away from my marriage without looking back. His little announcement just moved up my timeline by 3 weeks. My name doesn't matter as much as what happened. I'm 38 years old. I was a senior compliance officer at a mid-sized financial services firm in Charlotte for 9 years. I'm also, as of 8 months ago, a free woman. My husband. I'll call him my husband, because that's all he ever really was to me by the end. A role, a title, a liability I was methodically converting into an asset, was the kind of man who confused confidence with cruelty. He was charming at parties. He remembered everyone's drink order. He called my mother on her birthday every year without being reminded, which she never stopped mentioning, and he could make a table of strangers feel like old friends within 20 minutes. What he couldn't do was tolerate being outpaced by anyone. Especially not by me. We'd married 6 years ago. I was 32, recently promoted, flying high. He was in commercial real estate, doing well, used to being the more successful one in any room. For a while, our trajectories felt parallel. Then mine started pulling ahead. Quietly at first. A better bonus cycle, a title bump, a mention in an industry newsletter. Small things, objectively. But I watched something shift in him with each one. A tightening around the jaw, a slight delay before congratulating me. Comments at dinner that were technically jokes but landed like warnings. You're going to price yourself out of being likable, you know that. Nobody actually wants to be married to their boss. I just worry about you. You work so hard and for what? Some corporation that'll cut you the second the numbers dip? The last one he'd say with a soft voice and a hand on my arm. That was the one that took me the longest to identify as what it was. It started small, the way it always does. He began helping with our finances, joint accounts first, reasonable, married, normal. But then he started questioning my individual spending, not confrontationally, curiously. What's this charge? Who'd you have lunch with? Why are you paying for that subscription when I have the same one? He framed it as efficiency. I framed it, privately, as a slow erosion. By year 3, I noticed that every major decision, vacations, home repairs, which dinner party to attend, had quietly become his decision. I would suggest something, he would find a problem with it, and eventually we'd land on his version of the idea, and he'd present it to friends as though it had always been his. I started keeping a journal. Not out of strategy. Not yet. Just to prove to myself that I wasn't losing my mind. That things had actually been said, actually happened. That my memory of Tuesday wasn't being overwritten by his revision of Tuesday by Saturday. The journal became evidence. By year 4, I had 3 of them. The promotion party was a Saturday in October, 40 guests, a rented rooftop at a restaurant downtown, his colleagues and our mutual friends, and a handful of people I'd never met, who all seemed to know each other from golf. I'd received the layoff notice that Thursday. My company was restructuring, a genuine, across-the-board reduction, not a performance issue, not personal. My severance was generous, my references were glowing. I had 2 industry contacts who'd already privately expressed interest in bringing me on. I was not panicking, I was processing. I had not yet told my husband, because I needed 2 days to think clearly before having a conversation I knew would not go the way it should. He found out anyway. I still don't know exactly how. I suspect he saw an email notification on the shared laptop we used for household bills. But by Saturday evening he knew, and he chose a room full of people and an open bar as the venue for breaking the news. Tough timing for my wife, but I'll be taking care of us from here. I can still hear it, the particular music of it, the sympathy in his voice, the pride underneath. The way he squeezed my shoulder while he said it, as if I might need steadying. I excused myself to the restroom. I stood in front of the mirror and I thought about the separate bank account I'd opened 8 months earlier, using the address of my best friend's apartment for correspondence. I thought about the storage unit 2 miles from our house where I'd been quietly moving things. Documents, my grandmother's jewelry, the external hard drive with all my backups. I thought about the job offer I'd been discussing in careful offline conversations with a firm in Raleigh. I thought about the conversation I'd had with a family attorney, paid for in cash 6 months ago. I fixed my lipstick. I walked back out to the party. I did not leave that night. I left 3 weeks later. Those 3 weeks were the most focused of my life. I want to be honest about something, because I've heard people say, "Why didn't you just leave?" And I understand why they ask it. But the answer is that leaving an emotionally controlled marriage is not like walking out of a bad job. The control doesn't announce itself. It seeps. It restructures what feels normal. By the time you can name it, you've been inside it long enough that you've stopped trusting your own judgment about what you deserve, what you're capable of, what people will believe. I started rebuilding that trust the way I rebuild most things, methodically, with documentation. Year 1 of keeping real records, I used my accounting background to audit every joint financial transaction for the previous 24 months. I found a pattern. Every time I received a bonus deposit, a transfer would follow within a week, moving money into an investment account that was, technically, joined, but that he controlled entirely and that I had never once been invited to discuss. Over 2 years, the total was not nothing. I had a forensic accountant friend review my spreadsheet. She raised her eyebrows and asked if I had a lawyer. Year 2 of real records. I started keeping audio logs of significant conversations, not secretly recorded. I live in a 2-party consent state, and I'm not interested in doing anything that could be used against me. These were my own verbal notes, made privately after conversations while details were fresh. Timestamps, context, direct quotes I wrote down within minutes while my memory was intact. I also started attending therapy, and my therapist, with my permission, documented the patterns I described over 14 months of sessions. Year 1.5, if we're being precise. I quietly, legally withdrew my half of our joint savings. Not all of it. Exactly half, which was exactly what I was entitled to, and I did it incrementally over 7 months so it wouldn't trigger a conversation before I was ready to have it. Each withdrawal was small enough to be unremarkable. Together they represented 14 months of financial preparation. 3 weeks before I left, I accepted the position in Raleigh. I signed a lease on an apartment there. I told no one except my best friend and my attorney. I left on a Tuesday morning while he was at a showing. I had a moving company booked. Small, professional, recommended by a friend in a city where my husband had no contacts. They arrived at 9. By noon, everything that was mine was gone. The furniture we'd bought together I left entirely. I didn't want his taste in my new rooms. I left one thing, a manila envelope on the kitchen counter. Inside was a letter from my attorney, a summary of the financial documentation I'd compiled, and a single spreadsheet, clean-sourced, annotated, showing every transfer, every withdrawal from my bonus deposits, and its destination. The letter noted that a copy had already been sent to my attorney's office and would be provided to my husband's employer's compliance department. He worked for a firm that took financial ethics seriously, in the event that our divorce proceedings became contentious. I also left a copy of 14 months of therapy notes, not because they contained anything legally damaging to him, but because I wanted him to read, in a therapist's clinical language, the precise shape of what he had done. I drove to Raleigh. I stopped twice, once for coffee, once because I was crying too hard to see the road and I needed a few minutes in a gas station parking lot to let it move through me. Not grief for him, grief for the 6 years. For the version of me who thought she could outlove the problem. I let myself have 12 minutes, then I drove the rest of the way. His first call came at 2047 p.m. I didn't answer. His second was at 3001. The text started at 3015. This is insane. Call me. We need to talk about this like adults. Where are your things? What did you do? Then a longer one, around 7 p.m. I know you're upset about the party. I shouldn't have said it that way, and I'm sorry. But this is not the answer. We have a life. You don't throw away a life because you're embarrassed. I screenshot it. I sent it to my attorney. His family's messages came the next morning. His mother first. She had always been warm to me in a surface way. The kind of warmth that required I not inconvenience her son. Her text asked me to please be reasonable and reminded me that every marriage has difficult seasons. His brother sent a longer message about how I was damaging the family's reputation and that my husband was beside himself. A colleague of his, a man I'd met perhaps 4 times, messaged me on LinkedIn to say that he hoped I'd reconsider. I had prepared for this too. Each family message received the same reply, drafted by me and reviewed by my attorney. I appreciate your concern. My attorney will be in touch regarding next steps. Please direct further communication to her office. 3 sentences. No door open for negotiation. The colleague from LinkedIn I screenshotted and forwarded without reply. It became part of my file. What I did not prepare for was his mother. Not in the way I expected anyway. She called me 3 days later from a number I didn't recognize. Her landline, which I'd never had saved. I almost didn't pick up. I did pick up. I still don't know why. Maybe because it was late and I was tired and my guard was lower. She didn't apologize for the first message. She wasn't that kind of woman. What she said after a long pause was, "I want you to know I'm not calling for him." She told me that she had watched her son become his father. That she had noticed the pattern change in him after year 2 of our marriage. That she had said something to him once, privately, and he had dismissed her, and she had let it go because she didn't know how to hold on to a thing like that. She said, "I think you did what I was never brave enough to do." I sat on the floor of my new apartment, back against the wall, and I didn't say anything for a long time. She wasn't asking for a relationship. She wasn't asking for anything. She just needed to say it out loud. To someone who would understand it. I told her I heard her. She said thank you. We hung up. I cried for 40 minutes after that. Real grief. Different from the gas station kind. The kind that comes when you realize that the damage was bigger than you. That it had roots you couldn't see and that other people had been living in its shadow too. The divorce took 7 months. He contested it at first, because of course he did. But the financial documentation was precise, and the forensic accountant's assessment was damning, and his attorney apparently told him in so many words that the compliance disclosure my attorney had referenced was not a bluff she wanted to test. He agreed to terms in month 4. The settlement was fair, more than fair to me, I think, because his attorneys knew what was in that envelope and needed the conversation to be over. I started my new position the same month I signed the papers. Compliance director, better title, better salary, better city. My boss told me in my first week that she'd specifically sought out someone with my profile. Methodical, detail-oriented, able to see patterns others miss. I thanked her without explaining the irony. 6 months into my new life, I ran a financial literacy workshop through a local women's organization. I hadn't planned to. A friend mentioned they were looking for someone to talk about recognizing financial red flags in relationships. And I said yes before I finished processing the question. 32 women showed up. I had prepared 12 slides. I ended up talking for 2 hours. The questions they asked were not about interest rates or account structures. They were about this. How do you know when the monitoring becomes control? How do you document something that leaves no paperwork? How do you leave without it being used against you? I answered every question. I stayed until the building closed. Afterward, a woman approached me, mid-40s, quiet, holding her phone in both hands. She said she'd been married for 11 years and that nothing I'd said was unfamiliar, but that hearing it organized out loud, named and described in plain language, made her feel for the first time like she wasn't imagining it. I gave her my attorney's card and my direct number. She called 3 months later to tell me she'd filed. His promotion, as it turned out, lasted 16 months. I only know this because a former colleague mentioned it in passing. Apparently, the compliance review my attorney had quietly initiated through proper channels turned up irregularities that his new firm found difficult to overlook. He wasn't charged with anything. He was simply managed out, quietly, with a reference that I'm told was careful rather than glowing. He sent me one last message, 8 months after the divorce was final. It was long. It was full of language about growth and accountability and how he understood now things he hadn't understood then. He said he'd been in therapy. He said he hoped I was well. I read it once. I didn't reply, not out of anger. I want to be clear about that. Anger had stopped being useful to me a long time ago. I didn't reply because there was nothing in that message that required a response from me. He had written it for himself, not for me. He needed to send it. I did not need to receive it. I deleted it and made dinner. I'd started cooking again, actually cooking, dishes I used to make before I'd slowly let his preferences override my own. That night I made my grandmother's shrimp and grits, the recipe from the index card in her handwriting that had been in the storage unit for 14 months. I ate at the kitchen table with the windows open and the city coming in. It was the best meal I'd had in 6 years. People ask me sometimes, because I've told this story in pieces at workshops, to friends, once at a dinner party where the conversation turned and suddenly it was just the right thing to say. People ask me if I regret how long I waited, if I wish I'd left sooner. The honest answer is, I wish I'd recognized it sooner. But once I recognized it, every month I stayed was intentional. I stayed until the ground under me was solid. I stayed until leaving meant landing, not falling. I know that's a privilege. I know not everyone has 14 months and a forensic accountant friend and a therapist willing to write comprehensive session notes. I know some people have to leave with nothing in the middle of the night and figure out the rest later. I have enormous respect for that kind of courage, which looks nothing like mine but is courage all the same. What I hope when I tell this story is that someone hears the part that applies to them. Maybe it's the financial documentation. Maybe it's just the part where someone names the thing, the monitoring, the commentary, the small sustained erosion, and calls it what it is, because here's what nobody told me, and what I want to be the thing you take with you if you take nothing else. The moment I started writing it down. Not to use against him, not yet, just to prove to myself that it had actually happened. That was the moment I started coming back to myself. The journal was not a weapon at first, it was a record. It said, "This is real, you are not imagining it, you are here." Sometimes that's where you have to start. The woman who stood in that restaurant bathroom while her husband announced her worst week to 40 strangers is not the woman writing this now. She got in the car. She drove through the difficult part. She stopped crying when she needed to and kept going when she could. She landed. I've thought a lot about cause and effect since all of this. Not in any mystical sense, I'm too practical for that. But in the plain, observable way that choices compound. The way that every time my husband made me smaller in public, he was also, without knowing it, making me more precise in private, more careful, more certain. Each humiliation added one more brick to the foundation I was building underneath his feet. That's the thing about control. It assumes the other person is static. It assumes that because someone is quiet, they are also still. I was never still. What I want people to understand, what I wish someone had said to me in year 2, before I'd spent another 4 years finding my way to it, is that intelligence without courage is just a coping mechanism. I was smart enough to see what was happening from almost the beginning. I could name it, analyze it, trace its patterns in a spreadsheet. But knowing something and being willing to act on it are two completely different muscles. And for a long time, I had only developed one of them. The courage came slower. It came from writing things down when I wanted to let them go. It came from staying in therapy when I thought I was fine. It came from Simone, my best friend, who never once told me what to do, but who showed up every single time I needed someone to sit with me in the uncertainty. Courage is almost never dramatic in the early stages. It looks a lot like maintenance, like showing up for yourself in small ways when it would be easier not to. And the integrity piece, that's the one I'm most proud of. Because I could have gone further. I had enough documentation to do real, lasting damage to my husband's professional life. I chose not to. I used what I needed to protect myself, and I stopped there. Not because he deserved my restraint, but because I needed to be able to look at myself clearly after this was over, and I knew that becoming someone who punishes without limit, even someone who earned the punishment, would cost me something I wasn't willing to lose. Delia, the woman who approached me after my first workshop, understood this instinctively. She didn't want revenge, she wanted out, she wanted to land somewhere solid. That's the distinction that matters. Revenge is about them. Freedom is about you. Patrick, my husband, did face consequences, eventually, real ones, professionally, but they came from his own choices catching up with him, not from anything I engineered. That distinction matters to me more than most people probably understand. What I took from all of it is this: the quality of your life over time is shaped by the decisions you make when no one is watching. The journals I kept when I thought I was just trying to stay sane. The account I opened when I wasn't sure I'd ever actually use it. The therapist appointments I kept even when I felt like I was wasting an hour I didn't have. Those were the decisions that mattered, not the dramatic Tuesday when the moving truck came. That Tuesday was just the result of 100 quiet Tuesdays before it. You don't find your strength in the big moment, you build it in the ordinary ones. And then one day you walk out the door and you're already ready, because you never stopped becoming the person who could.